On the international level, we need to ask other countries to open up their own economies so that the jobs can be grown there and they don't have to come take our jobs here in the United States. But I'd say the lowest hanging fruit, and something we never hear from politicians or political candidates, is addressing this problem of people who come here entirely legally on student visas or work visas and then overstay their welcome. In 2005, the year that I have the most recent data for, 11.5 million illegal immigrants in this country, half of those actually came here legally on a student visa or a work visa, but they overstayed their welcome. Here's my very concrete proposal to address that situation. When people enter this country and apply for a visa, they come through either an airport or a seaport or on ground. They're typically, they'll have to do a fingerprint on the way in to determine that they are in fact that person they're representing themselves to be. On the way out, we don't require them to do the same fingerprint. We don't check them off the list in every port of entry or exit. So what we have is we lose track of who is in the country and who is out of the country. We need to immediately address that situation where any holes still exist. We also might consider equipping our local traffic cops with the Department of Homeland Security database, because the average person comes into contact with law enforcement and legal authorities most frequently. It's your average traffic cop. If we can give them access to the Homeland Security database in addition to other databases they have on their laptop computers, when someone is pulled over for a traffic violation, we could determine whether in fact they're in this country legally or illegally and begin deportation proceedings immediately should they not be here legally. That would be a very cost-effective measure to try and sort out what I regard as some of the biggest problem with respect to illegal immigration here. Final thing I'd say is during this war on terror, this is really a national security issue, and we need to treat it as such. So frequently we seem to forget that these people who come into this country legally, so many, 9/11, if I recall, 7 of those terrorists actually were here on either work or student visas, including the ringleader, Muhammad Atta. So if we would take the measures I have just laid out, there would be national security benefits in addition to employment benefits there. I'd support other measures, including ensuring that at the workplace there are systems in place so that before a person is hired on, we ensure they're not an illegal immigrant. But this is definitely something that Congress has failed to address in recent years, and I'd like to be part of the solution.
Thank you very much. That's a fascinating statistic about the here on expired visas, 11.5 million. Is that the
half of that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, half of that figure.
Wow.
2005. Yeah.
Next, we have a question from a constituent in Brown County who asks, what specific things would you do to undo 100 years of moving away from the Constitution? How will you start to reduce the scope and power of the federal government?
Sure. Well, there are a number of different things we can do. We need to start by reading the Constitution again. So our legislators ought to be referring to it before every vote they cast. I would support a measure to require on every piece of legislation that wins its way through Congress that we make it very easy for legislators cite those provisions of the Constitution under which that legislation falls. And if it's kind of a tortured explanation as to somehow this falls under the general welfare or the Commerce Clause, I would very publicly make known that I disagree and vote against the legislation. I think that's the only way to do it, is just to send strict constitutionalists to Congress to vote yea or nay on particular pieces of legislation. You know, there's some other things we can do too. First, we need to require members of Congress to actually read all the bills they vote on to determine whether or not they're consistent with the Constitution. So I would support an act that's been proposed called the Read the Bills Act. I would be a co-sponsor of this legislation. It requires that members of Congress swear under oath with penalty of perjury that they've actually read the darn thing before they vote on it, or had it read to them by a staffer. That would reduce the size and scope of government, because I guarantee many of these politicians don't want to read the 10,000-page bills. It would also reduce the volume of each bill, so the average person, myself included, would have time to keep our members of Congress in check and keep our eye on them.
Very good.
Now we have a question from a constituent in Du Bois County who asks, what plans do you have about our dependency on foreign oil?
Sure. Well, our demand for petroleum products, for better or worse, continues to increase as our economy grows. Unfortunately, right now, it's not growing very fast, but it will continue to grow as we look into the future. So as much as I like the phrase energy independence, there's a whole lot more to it than just drilling here domestically, though I support that quite a bit. We do need to drill for natural gas here in the United States. We need to take advantage of our petroleum resources. There are ways to do this in an environmentally responsible way with new drilling rigs that can drill horizontally into different areas. I'm an environmentalist, but I'm a practical environmentalist, so there are ways that we can get around all these things. So first, I would open up our domestic sources. But we also must recognize that we will remain dependent for some time on some of these other sources overseas. And one of the roles historically of our military has been to keep other countries honest and keep open the lines of commerce so that we can continue to trade with one another as liberty-minded, freely agreeing individuals do. So I don't support a strong military presence where it can be avoided on others' lands, but we have over-the-horizon military capabilities. I know from my experience in the Navy and then the Marines, where we will need a battle fleet out there of aircraft carriers that can respond to situations where bad people try and close down the gears of commerce worldwide. So that's another thing we can do. We've heard a lot about green technology and renewable energy in recent years and months in particular. Now, I support these technologies, but I'm not a fan of government picking winners and losers, because I have seen up close and personal how politicians make these decisions, and too frequently the politicians make these decisions based on lobbyists influencing them. I'd rather have investors make these decisions and scientists prove to us that they have the best technologies. So that would be my approach. I'm not opposed to all of these technologies and no government involvement in the area, but I'm very skeptical of it. It's just not my view of the economy that government bureaucrats or elected officials are better at choosing the technologies of tomorrow than business people.
Okay, then the last constituent in the 9th District would like to know, how do you propose to reduce the ever-increasing federal budget deficit, or even eliminate it?
Sure. That's a very important question. I'm going to make one addendum to the earlier question, and that's in the area of nuclear power. That's actually been an area where, in many respects, the government has been imposing costs on that industry by making the permitting process so expensive. This is why we haven't had many nuclear power plants permitted in recent decades, because it's just too darn expensive to go through all the government wickets. So maybe government considers picking up a portion of that cost of the permitting process to ensure that we get more of these smaller scale nuclear power plants built, which are much smaller than the nuclear power plants of old. So I just wanted to make that addition.